bit of the evening. And the main bit of the evening is to introduce a gentleman I've known for 4 or 5 years now. His name's David, who asked me a few months ago.
My God, has it been that long?
Shut up.
Oh,
You're not allowed
the
to
horror.
I'm going to mute you. He asked if he could speak at For the Many Mondays. I asked him, what about? And he told me that he wanted to talk about what he understood. And what David understands are the benefit systems for disabled people. He understands autism because David himself is autistic. He's the ideal person to talk about benefits, advocacy, autism, and me. I mean him. So a former disability officer of Chester CLP, who also stood for election to the NEC, please welcome Mr. David Southall.
Hi all. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So I'm going to share my screen because I've got some slides. So hopefully you should see those now, and I'll put it into present mode. So it should be full screen now. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yes, Dave. Yes, Dave.
So I've given this presentation a few times to a few different groups now, so I thought I would do it in this form as well, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. There's actually 2 presentations. There's one on universal credit after this one as well. And basically what it is, it's a system brief introduction, because the benefit system is incredibly complicated. So full advice, should you need it, needs a one-to-one clinic really. And I'll be taking questions at the end of each presentation. So let's do some definitions first of all. Benefits, what the hell does that mean? Okay, well, it's a UK government system to replace or enhance income from employment or other sources, administered by the Department of Work and Pensions, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, local government, or employers, depending on the particular benefit. For example, personal independence payment is by the Department of Work and Pensions. Tax, housing benefit is local government. They're founded in law, therefore the government cannot either break the law or fail to follow the law, which is actually quite important, which I'll get into a bit later. And there's 2 types of benefits, non-means tested or means tested. Non-means tested are either contributory, e.g. the state pension, or non-contributory, e.g. personal independence payment, where you can just apply and it's both an in-work and an out-of-work benefit that tops up your income should you meet the criteria. And there's means tested, such as universal credit, which basically they check how much money you've got, what assets you've got, that kind of thing. Advocacy is the next thing that I would like to define. Now, advocacy is the act of speaking on the behalf or in support of another person, place, or thing, pleading or arguing in favour of something, problem solving designed to protect the personal and legal rights of individuals so that they can live a dignified existence. And it's from the late Middle English via Old French from medieval Latin, advocatia, from advocare, which means summon, call to one's aid, which I quite like. So, autism and me. Some people say that me is my favourite subject. The distant past. I was born autistic, but I didn't know until I was in my 40s. No qualifications until in my 40s because I had awful problems at school with social interaction and in workplaces and that kind of thing. But I left school with no qualification, but I I went into IT because I love computers. But throughout my working life, I had great stressing jobs and social situations, but I had no clue why. And basically 2001, I had a nervous breakdown, is how I describe it now. A close friend died suddenly. I was in a very stressful job as an IT manager with a pretty awful boss. Think Donald Trump on steroids, proper capitalist. So I entered the benefits system in 2001. And basically, I spent 15 years as a shut-in. But during that time, I did a huge amount of reading, playing fast-paced computer games, and taking high doses of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Prozac for anybody else. And I found that through that 15 years, I kind of don't know what I do know now. It's like anybody can start, a subject, and, suddenly I might recall something that I remember, I read about that a few years ago, and I can enter the conversation, which is quite useful. So 2016 to 2019, what happened was what I call a fortunate convergence. I was coming out of my big, long clinical depression. I was thinking, well, what do I want to do with the second half of my life? I was bored to death of IT. So I did a GCSE maths and English just to get my hand back into learning, as I planned to do a 1-year access to law and criminology by correspondence course, which I still haven't got round to, because a family member had a legal problem which ended up lasting 2 years. So I got what I call on-the-job training in, the legal systems, the mysteries and dark arts of the civil court and the civil procedure rules and all this kind of thing. So I would advise anybody to just read 1 or 2 books on law, something by Robert Rinder, because it does, I think, change the way that you think. I think in terms of arguments supported by evidence, what is objective evidence, what is subjective evidence. It really does change the way that you think, and it is a real advantage, I'd say. And at this time, I was invited to change from disability living allowance, which I was on from 2001, to the new personal independence payment. And I went through the process and I got 0 points. Now, I wear hearing aids in both ears normally. I've got this headset on at the moment. But when you wear hearing aids, you're supposed to get 2 points automatically for having to use a device to help you communicate. And I didn't even get that 2 points. I got 0 points, even though in the medical assessment, the nurse said he appears to be wearing a hearing aid in his right ear, but she didn't say anything about the left ear. So I was a bit miffed about that. So I did a bit of a deep dive into how the benefit system works to try and help myself. And I went through the system. First of all, you have to ask for a mandatory reconsideration. And then I went to the independent lower tribunal for an appeal. And I won my lower tribunal appeal on the submitted written argument that I'd produced alone. What happened was the clerk of the tribunal rung me up in the morning and said, "Don't bother coming in, Dave. The judge has took a look at what you've written and it's given you everything that you asked for." Excuse me a sec. Got a seed from my toasted seeded bread stuck in my tooth there. So I thought, oh, right, that's interesting. He didn't even, the judge, and the tribunal is a 3-person tribunal. You have to go in normally, and you have a judge, a doctor, and a disabled person who decide whether the DWP are wrong and you should get benefits, or if you're wrong and you shouldn't get benefits. And the tribunal didn't even ask me to come in. So I thought, right, okay, can I start helping other people to navigate the system? So around Blacon, where I live, I started getting referrals and started helping other people with PIP to start off with. And I started writing these submissions for other people. And then a judge for one of these people that I helped said, this is the best and most comprehensive submission he'd ever seen in all the time that he'd been doing tribunals. So I say that is the power of autism, because autistics, we're all different, but some autistics can be very detail orientated. So from there, 2019 on, I've been doing volunteering, training, and getting more experience. So I helped Dial House. I've done a couple of in Chester, done a couple of cases of PIP for them. The National Autistic Society. I was Labour Party disability officer for a while. I volunteer for this thing. Cardiff Lawyers Care, which without the pandemic I wouldn't be able to do because it all went Zoom. So before the pandemic they were doing it physically in Cardiff, but because it went to Zoom I was able to help them out even from being in Chester. I got on this thing called West Cheshire Poverty Truth Commission, which is a presentation in itself, and I've done quite a lot of personal clients. And I've only ever had one case that I've had to send to what's called the upper tribunal. So basically I've won everything up to now, apart from one case. And the upper tribunal has just knocked it back to the DWP, saying that, listen, DWP, you're wrong. The lower tribunal is wrong. Mr. Southall is right. Have another look at this case. So I'm quite pleased about that. So I paid for some courses and books, and I've never met a free Zoom course on this topic that I didn't like and sign up for, and many more different things, but I don't want to bore you. So I'll give you an example process for personal independence payment. Okay, step one. I've now developed a standard procedure by working with PIP clients over time. And if you follow the steps, then usually the outcome is a good result. But a warning, nothing is guaranteed when dealing with the Department of Work and Pensions, DWP, because they're unethical, evil, organisation essentially. So this is why we need to do the best we can to present your case. So I'm talking to you as if I was talking to the client now. And the client will have to do some jobs to help me to help the client. And I also will get to see a lot of information such as medical records, but everything is kept confidential between me, the client, you, and the DWP. Step two is to open the claim, and there's a web page to do it. And a form will be posted out, and I need to get that form round to my little office where I live as soon as you get it. Step three is gathering data part A. So the client needs to contact the doctor and make a subject access request for part of the medical records. Don't get the whole thing. I only need the following sections, which are listed on screen. I won't go through them all. Because if I ask for the whole thing, I get a pile of papers about, 10 inches high, and it's too much. I just need those basic things, which is about 5 to 10 pages. I don't need further than this, so no consultations. Once I have this, again, it needs to be dropped round to me or mailed to me if you're further out from Blake or Chester. Then I need to gather data part B. So I get the client to go and do the PIP self-test so that I can get an idea of what they themselves think that their impacts from their health conditions are. For example, I have fibromyalgia, which restricts my mobility, especially when I first get out of bed. I'm like a rusty old engine that creaks and groans and can hardly move sometimes. So that is one of the impacts from one of my conditions, because the benefit system now is not based on the condition, because then everybody would get points, and the government doesn't want that. They want to get the benefits bill down by saying to people, well, we'll only help you if your impacts fit our criteria. And I also say to the client, think who you know who could write a letter on your support and let me know, because that's actually quite powerful. The more people that you can get to confirm, yes, this person has difficulty walking, for example, then that is all evidence that will support the claim. and think about what other evidence can be gathered together, specialist treatment such as cancer treatment, and I get the client to let me know what they think they themselves can gather. And then you need to tend to educate the client, because it is a very complicated system. So I get them to read the government's own websites, because it is fairly good what they put out, just talking about the general system. And I also have to educate the client to be patient, because the process can take a year or longer. I've heard in Flint it's 2 years to get to lower tribunal. So here's an example of a timeline. January 2020, opened the claim and called for the application form. June was the telephone assessment because of COVID, not a face-to-face assessment. Then, because they got 0 points, we had to do a mandatory reconsideration in July. Then they still didn't get what I thought they were legally, ethically, and morally entitled to. So we appealed online. December 2020, we had the tribunal, and January 2021, we got the decision letter from the tribunal, and they won their case. So you can see it was literally, just under 12 months to go through this process. So step 6 is the forms. I fill in the forms in conjunction with the client, and I don't actually write on the forms. They don't allow you with PIP to have a form that you can fill in on a computer, which is very annoying. So what I do is I circumvent that. I just put stickers on the original form saying, please refer to the typed information. And I have my own form which replicates the paper form, so that I can put as much information in as I want, because the paper form is limited. This is one of the quirks of the DWP, is they don't currently give computer forms. So why do we do that? Well, legibility, handwriting isn't as good as typing stuff in. Reuse of arguments, easier for other clients, because once you've argued for fibromyalgia for one person, for example, you can argue the same for another person using copy and pasted with a few edits of the same arguments. So I can keep the arguments that I take time to research and do. And you can use as much space as needed, because the paper form is limited. So the client signs the form and what's called an agency agreement, which sets me up with the DWP for GDPR purposes, because without this agreement saying that the client wants me to speak on their behalf with agency, the DWP won't give me the time of day. And once we've done that, the forms and any supporting evidence that we gathered in Part A and Part B are submitted. Step 7 in the PIP process is the assessment. I can go with the client to the assessment, or they can go with a friend, or I can be on the call for the telephone assessments, and video assessments are apparently coming in at some point. Assessments are basically useless. It's a con, basically. They are completely useless, the independent assessment companies. So it's just something that you have to go through and get done so that you can move on through the process. So I could chip in where useful, but assessments are generally useless. But recording is again supposed to become incoming, and I think if assessments are recorded, then that will be a good thing. Now, the most important rule that the assessment companies never follow unless you tell them to is 1.6.46 of the assessment guide. And what the nurse or the physiotherapist is supposed to do is prior to concluding the face-to-face or telephone or video consultation, the health professional should give claimants an overview of the findings they've taken from the consultation, including an indication of the fluctuation and variability of function they have recorded. Claimants should be invited to clarify any points and ask any questions they have about the assessment procedure, and ask whether there is anything else they would like to include. The HP should always attempt to respond to any issues or concerns they express, and that's from the PIP Assessment Guide, Part 1, the assessment process. Now, Atos and the other two never do this. Never do this, because they hate doing it and they hate being prompted to do it, because essentially the claimant can then have a little argument with the assessment provider, the nurse or the physiotherapist, saying, well, you've got that completely wrong, you need to change that. So that's why they conveniently forget to do this. But whenever I'm on an assessment call, at the end, I always say, well, are you going to follow 1.6.46? And normally the assessment person goes, what the hell's that? And I go, well, in the PIP assessment guide part 1. So you have to quote their own rules at them to get anything done. This is the con of the independent assessment companies. Step 8 is the DWP decision, because the assessment company doesn't make the decision, the DWP does. So that medical report or functionality report goes to a DWP case manager decision maker, and you get a decision. And they normally just go with whatever the assessment provider's done. So if the client's unhappy with the decision, is happy with the decision, you know, on the rare occasion that the client gets what they want, my involvement ends there until the client's due for a new form in about 2 years on average, because you get reassessed every 2 years. If the client is unhappy, we then request a copy of the assessment report to go through and basically tear apart, metaphorically, to make the nurse or the physiotherapist look like an idiot, because that's what you have to do, unfortunately. So I analyse the PA4 version 3, that's what the assessment report's called, and write a mandatory reconsideration submission. But the submission is actually aimed for the lower tribunal audience of the judge, doctor, and disabled person, and gather further evidence as required. Because if you aim it for the judge, doctor, and disabled person, if you do go to lower tribunal, you just have to copy and paste to it and make a few changes. So again, it saves you time in the long run. A submission can be up to 40 A4 pages, as I copy and paste law decisions from the upper tribunal into it to make the point, because as I said in the beginning, the benefit system is based in law. The DWP cannot break the law, and they have to follow the law. And upper tribunal decisions are what's called case law. It's secondary legislation. So the DWP has to follow that. For example, hearing aids, automatic 2 points. Upper tribunal decide that in a case, so you just quote that, and every time you do that, you get the 2 points for having hearing aids. So you request the mandatory reconsideration and post the submission and evidence to the DWP. Step 9 is the DWP mandatory reconsideration decision. Again, if the client is happy with the decision, my involvement ends until the client is due for a new form in 2 years. But I have actually got one client a 10-year award, so I won't hear from her again for 10 years if all goes well. If the client is unhappy, request a tribunal appeal. Now, the tribunal is independent of the DWP. At mandatory reconsideration, you're up against a DWP. At tribunal, you're up against the law. That's how it changes. So you fill in the appeal form and modify the submission I've already done for the appeal. Post a submission and evidence to Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals Service this time, who are independent of the DWP. And what I say is, for anyone who is in the process of appealing or is thinking about it, please don't give up. The tribunal is far more likely to listen to you and actually take into account any and all evidence you send in to support your claim. The tribunal is the best friend of the benefits claimant, because they actually follow the law, where the DWP conveniently don't a lot of the time. And step 10 is the tribunal hearing. I can go to the client, or if I can be on the call if it's telephone, and again, video tribunals are coming in. So step 11 is you get the tribunal decision, which is only appealable to the upper tribunal if there is an error of law. And I've had one case go to the upper tribunal. At the time that I made these slides, it was waiting to be considered, but it's now been decided that I'm in the right, DWP and the lower tribunal in the wrong. So the upper tribunal judges have kicked it back to the DWP to say, think again. Again, if the client is unhappy, we could at this point either start a new claim, or you can go to the appeal court. None of my cases have got that far. And none of my cases we've had to start a new claim. And again, if the client's happy with the decision of the upper tribunal, my involvement ends again until the client is due for a new form. Now, if the DWP makes mistakes, you can complain, and there's an independent complaints examiner at the DWP. And if the assessment company makes mistakes, you can complain. And people are also starting to sue in court, both the DWP and assessment companies. There's been a few cases now, and as far as I can tell, everybody's warned against the DWP and the assessment companies where there's been negligence and that kind of thing. And then once I'm done with the client, all I do is recover out-of-pocket expenses such as postage. I don't charge for my time. And I ask people to make a voluntary contribution to printer ink, because that's pretty expensive, as I'm sure you're aware. But that's voluntary. I only actually ask for postage. Envelopes, paper, I just pay for all myself. So it's a very complicated system. I've given you a very small taste. And if you want to take a deeper dive, the book to start with is from Disability Rights, called the Disability Rights Handbook, which is £37. And what I'll do is I'll share the links to these slides with Dave so that he can send them round afterwards if you want to have a closer look at any of this, and also refresh yourself about what I'm waffling on about. So that's the end of the first presentation. So any questions, and if you want to email me any questions later, there is the email address that I use for my benefits work, as it were. So over to you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Dave. Could you take off your I will send that out to everyone, as you suggested. Fascinating, mate. It had been really very, very helpful. I've gone through the procedure myself, or Sue and myself have, for John. We've been doing it now for 18 years. And it's an absolute sod of a thing to do. They knock you back for anything. You've got to be so careful what you write. We've usually, when we've been to the tribunal, we've usually won. But the thing is, it's the mental exhaustion of having to do it, and how people who have got a mental problem, which we're talking about on Monday at the CLP, or if people are distinctly ill and disabled, the energy that they actually spend in doing this is soul destroying, and they're actually shattered. And it doesn't help them, it makes them worse. And this is the worrying thing about this benefit system. There's got to be a lot more advocates, in my opinion. I'm absolutely delighted what you're doing, Dave. It is absolutely brilliant what you do. And
well, we're waiting for the government green paper that's coming out by the end of July, and they're supposed to be talking about advocacy as part of the green paper for disabled people. So we'll wait and see if anything emerges.
Yeah. We've got a couple of people who want to ask some questions. I'm going to start with Vicky first, and then go to Andy, and then go to Paul. So Vicky, your question.
You're muted.
You're muted.
I did the space thing and it didn't work. Right.
That's Monty for you.
I just so in awe of David and in-depth knowledge, and it comes from personal experience as well as determination. To get to the root of what it's all about. I only did a hand-holding exercise for somebody who was going through an assessment, and I think this is where the fault lies, because it's all very well saying that we should be able to have advocates. There should be no need for advocates, really. You only have the need for advocates because the initial system is so appallingly bad. Well, appallingly bad from our point of view, because we think we want people to get benefits as quickly as possible. Whereas the system's set up in the first place to deny it, and then to wear people down so that they don't proceed with it any further. And the fact that they might starve to death, as has actually happened,
Yeah.
and the UN has come down and, you know, seen what's been going on in our country, and, you know, said how what appalling breach of human rights it is. They really don't care about that. But the chilling thing for me is that the whole thing is based upon these professional people, nurses or physiotherapists, who you would think of are trained to go out to help people, but are employed at quite a high salary compared to their colleagues who work for the NHS, and are prepared to go into a system and do people down deliberately. And when I was hand-holding for this assessment that was taking place, I just couldn't believe how bad this chap was. He was a nurse, and he totally tricked the applicant and said to this person, it won't be held against you if you don't do this, but I'd like to see you raising your hands above your head. And of course, that's a bit of a trick, because if you can raise your hands above your head, they'll say, well, you can hang out your washing and you can do all kinds of things, even though you can just maybe just do it that once. But she said, well, it won't be held against me. He said, no, it won't be held against you. So she said, well, I don't really want to do that. You know, it's a bit demeaning. But of course, in the report, it was held against her because he wrote that she refused to do it. And when it's a very complicated kind of medical history and very limited time in which she could have to express or expand on how these things were affecting her day-to-day life, and she was cut short. So I and as well as appeal, she did successfully appeal. She went through all of this system that you're explaining, and she did succeed. But and the complaint was put in. We put in a complaint about this individual, and I think that's what should happen every single time. And then we ought to have freedom of information of how many times these people are complained about, and where are their professional bodies to do with the ethics that allow them to do it? It's like Nazi Germany.
Yeah, can I just jump in on?
Not to state it, but that's what it reminds. That's why I was so chilled by it.
Yeah, can I just jump in on freedom of information? This is why, you see, freedom of information only applies to government and local government and that kind of thing. So when you try and make a freedom of information to Capita PIP, who do the assessments, one of the three companies do the assessments, it won't get you anywhere, because they're a commercial organisation which is under contract to the government and therefore not covered by freedom of information. That's why the government won't bring the assessments back in-house under the DWP banner. It's all a big con. It's been very carefully designed to make it, you know, this is just my conspiracy theory view of it. It's all been designed very carefully to make it as obtuse as possible so that people, you know, just give up. You know, it's that difficult. That's just my thoughts on it anyway.
Andy,
Yeah,
unmute.
I have done. Yeah, thanks very much, David. That was absolutely great. Real clarity there on the process. The question I've got is that, as in my work as a counsellor, I sometimes have to write letters in support of people claiming, and you know, you're not really quite sure what you should put in, because you don't want to say, well, they're good on 2 days a week and bad on 3, because that might make they don't get their benefits or they lose points. So
yeah, can I just jump in on that? Another thing that the DWP and Capita PIP do not tell you is the 50% rule. The way that PIP, for example, works according to the law is that if you have an impact, a dysfunction from your health condition, over 50% of the time, looking backwards 3 months and predicted 9 months ahead, you should score points for the particular descriptor. So, for example, I wear hearing aids in both ears. Normally when I'm not got a headset in, I wear them all the time. So that's over 50% of the day. And if you have an impact for part of the day, it is classed as affecting you, impacting you for the whole of the day. So, for example, if you can go for a walk in the morning, but then that knackers you out for the rest of the day, you have to like sit with your feet up, then you get points for mobility. But all this is kept secret until you look deeper into the actual legislation and the actual upper tribunal decisions that the judges have made about this. And then it all becomes clearer. PIP is actually, in my view, if it was a proper system, pretty easy to get, really, when you look deeper into it. It's just they've made the system so obtuse and complicated, and you haven't got they've made it adversarial, so it's you against the DWP rather than you in cooperation with the DWP, and you as the claimant by yourself haven't got equality of firepower. The DWP have unlimited money because they can just print it, quantitative easing. So they've got unlimited money to hire the best barristers in the country if they need to. So they've got unlimited firepower, where you're there by yourself doing Google searches on the internet about PIP. That's the inequality of firepower with the adversarial system. And if it was a criminal case, it just, well, I could go into the problems that the secret barrister talk about the criminal law system at the moment, but it wouldn't be countenance in the criminal court. So you can see how there's this inequality, and it's all kept secret. So when you write a letter, you can write about, well, I've known Mr. X for so long. I've observed that he has difficulty walking. I know him as a very honest and reliable person who wouldn't be engaged in any kind of fraud. Essentially whatever you can do to support him and or her, or transgendered or other persons, just to be PC about it, that person in their claim for a benefit, which probably they are morally, ethically, and legally entitled to. I always use that term whenever I'm writing a submission. In my opinion, this person is morally, legally, and ethically entitled to these points for this descriptor. Say if they wear hearing aids, which I always use an example, they are morally, ethically, and legally entitled to 2 points for wearing hearing aids.
Okay. Yeah, because that's the kind of thing I was looking for you to kind of give us, is any sort of links on the internet, or whether you send out some sort of guidance to people. So that was one. And the other, just another quick question was, with autism, and claiming for PIP, how difficult is that if someone who functions well in society, but has lots of anxieties, struggles like crazy, but still manages to do it?
Yeah, it's, again, with autism, which again is another presentation all in itself, because it's such a huge spectrum. I know autistics who need an awful lot of help, who not want to be unkind to them, have difficulty tying their own shoelaces. I also know other autistics who are very, very functional. Stephen Hawking was assumed to be have a form of autism. Einstein was assumed, although we don't know, to be have a form of autism, because there's a big spectrum. So myself, there's a big list of autistic traits. There's hundreds of traits, and autistics are individual people like anybody is, but they can share these autistic traits. So, for example, I like organization, as do some of my autistic friends. I like routine. I have difficulty with social situations. For example, one of our friends is having a wedding reception in Ellesmere Port later in the year, and I got an invite, but I felt it would be a bit too much for me, because unlike if I go somewhere in Chester, I can quickly escape in a taxi back home if it becomes too overwhelming. Getting back from Ellesmere Port quickly would be a bit difficult. So I don't feel I could, so even though I would quite like to go, if it was in Chester, I probably would go to the wedding reception, but because it's in Ellesmere Port, I have difficulty with that social anxiety of actually going to that. So it just depends on the individual. But with claiming PIP with autism, again, it comes down to the 50. I always go for the 50% rule. I always talk to people and say, right, what are your health conditions? What are your impacts from the health conditions? Because the benefit system is based on impacts. So, for example, the reason I get ESA is because I've got fibromyalgia and I've got sleep apnea, which are two which are called energy limiting chronic illnesses, which means I have to sleep twice in 24 hours. So before this meeting, I had to have a 2-hour nap, 1 REM cycle plus half an hour to let me fall asleep so that I would be fit enough to be able to do this session. And that's why I'm in the support group for ESA, because the government says, well, it's unlikely you'll be able to hold down a full-time job because, you know, after lunch it's likely you could lose consciousness if you don't go for a nap. Because I have sleep apnea, I have this machine over my nose which helps me breathe when I sleep. If I fall asleep in my chair without that machine, it could be quite dangerous, because if I have what's called an apnea, it can stop the heart. So the government says, yeah, it's actually, you know, you have this energy limiting chronic illness, which means you get very fatigued, you have to sleep, nap during the day to be able to function. So it's unlikely you could hold down a job in a traditional sense. But again, I volunteer, but I work around my health conditions. It's like today, this session, to be able to do it, I've had to have a nap beforehand for a couple of hours to get what's called REM, rapid eye movement sleep cycle in. So again, it just depends on the individual, really.
Thank you for that. Paul, you've got a question.
Yeah, and it's probably one that can't be answered directly, because I was just wondering, how much do these private companies charge for their services? Now, you can't give a freedom of information to the company, but I guess you can to the government and say, how much money are you given to that company, divide it by the number of claimants they deal with to work out how many, because if you're to add up the cost of how many are coming back from the courts and all the cost that entails, then they must be costing the government an awful lot of money and making a lot of profit at the same time.
Yeah, better people than me have tried to find out, because they've tried to find out, but the government quotes commercial confidentiality in the contracts we've got a rough idea how much it costs, but the government won't be more specific because they quote this commercial confidentiality. Again, this is the con of the way the system's been set up, by separating the assessment from a government function into a private company like Capita PIP, or it used to be called ATAS, but I think it's called Independent Assessment Services now, and Maximus is the third one. Because of these three companies are commercial entities, the government can quote commercial confidentiality, so we can't actually really find out. You know, better people than me have tried. I think the Good Lord Project and people like that have had a go, but haven't really got that far.
But surely as citizens, we should know how much money are we paying for the benefit system. I mean,
oh yeah, we should know. We've got a rough idea because it's in the budget books and whatever. But they're very circumspect about it, and whenever anybody asks, they say, "Oh, commercial confidentiality in a government contract," and that kind of thing.
Just wondering whether those people who've had a look at it can estimate, well, if you had a simpler system, you might actually save money.
Well, I'm a fan of universal basic income that tapers off the more money that you earn. So somebody on zero income, you know, for just pulling a figure out of the air, £1,000 a month, but by the time that you're earning, you know, £2,000 a month, you don't get any universal basic income. Or the other way of doing it is having a universal basic income of, say, £1,000 a month, but lowering the living and minimum wage to compensate. So you still get your universal basic income, but if you want to go and work somewhere, then you get, you know, a top up, you know, for working. And then that would, you know, allow people to, instead of like just taking any job that they can, would actually, you know, help people choose work that they're infused for and that kind of thing. But there's various ways of doing it, but the benefit system is dysfunctional since 2010 when they changed it all. It's regarded as dysfunctional, but they are bringing out a green paper that's supposed to be changing things, but we'll wait and see. You know,
Well,
never trust a Tory, as they say.
Well done.
Paul, you're not going to ask a fourth question. I'm going to go to Dorothy. I'm going to go to Dorothy.
Just congratulating her.
I'll mute you, Paul.
Are you listening?
I'm going to go to Dorothy, and I'm going to welcome Dorothy. And I do know, I've known Dorothy for some time, that she has got quite a bit of experience on the benefits and disabled things. So, Dorothy, welcome. And I will hand you over for your question.
Thank you. Good evening, David. I'm very on board with everything you say, because, like just mentioned, I've done benefits, and I've got a son also with severe learning disabilities, autism, epilepsy, behaviours that challenge. He also was diagnosed when he was 42. I challenged over the years because I saw traits of autism. I got told by consultants, no, he only has traits, he hasn't got autism. I said, I don't care what you say, I want him assessed. He was assessed at 42 and he was diagnosed with childhood autism. So the parent and the mum and the carer is always right at the end of the day, aren't they? Yeah, I say fight the system, and if you know, if you're right, you're always right. As we know, the PIP was replaced by the Disability Living Allowance.
No, it's the other way around. Disability Living Allowance has changed to PIP.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And also, I know my son had an indefinite claim, so he didn't have to have any assessments.
Yeah.
But when that came in, he's actually got a 10-year.
Yeah.
He's got a 10-year on his. But at that time, I put a petition. I put a petition up. I am still doing that petition. I ain't giving up. I've got over 31,700. It went to Parliament at 10,000. But you've got to get 100,000, which is absolutely ridiculous. But my argument is, my son will go another 10 years. He's going to get worse. He isn't going to get any better. He has deteriorated so badly, you know. But the fact is, I'm still fighting that. We need to fight that system. I did go to the local MP, but she absolutely agreed on the changes in the benefit. But what happens with the Conservative Party? They always change the benefit system for their reasons. Because if you think back to 1992, it was then the attendance allowance.
Yeah.
And that went to 65 and over. And they fetched the DLA in. And then they said that was 20 years old and nobody was assessed. What were they talking about? People were assessed. So the argument is this benefit is really bad because they took away their rights, what they had before, and there was no explanation why they did it. But
save money. Try and save money, that's what it's about.
Yeah, but it's like somebody else mentioned tonight about human rights. It's not good at all, is it? It ain't. My son's on ESA as well, he's in a support group. But all these, you know, these systems and that is, you know, it's like what I can say as well, when you're claiming, it's always good when they ask about how does it affect you in a day. I've always said, always tell them about your worst day. No use saying about a good day because you can never go back then. It's always about what you are, because how can you say you have a good day? Because if you say that, oh, my good day's like this, you can never say, well, what was my worst day like? So I always say, always put it down as what you would be on your worst day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
I agree with everything you said, Dorothy, and everything that that you said, David, as well, because one of the interesting things which I came up before I go back to Vicky, who's got a hand up, is when John actually went for an assessment, he had to have the doctor come out to him because John can't go out of the house sometimes for his particular condition. And the doctor who came round, he was very upset because John was not out of bed. He said, "Why isn't he out of bed?" And the answer was, he can't get out of bed. He doesn't want to get out of bed. He's in that condition at the moment. Anyway, we got a report from the doctor, and the doctor said there was nothing wrong with John. So we got another doctor in, we got it all sorted out, and we did all this, and we went for the appeal. And as you mentioned before, David, on the appeal, you have a disabled person, you have a chairperson, and you have a doctor. When we got there, that doctor who actually came round to see John was actually on that appeals board. It was staggering. It was absolutely staggering. The first thing we said, and he turned around and said, "Oh, I didn't realise it was that John Walsh." And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you know, and we had to wait another 3 months for another assessment, but we did get letters of apology, and we got actually what we wanted. But that's another trick they pull as well. They use the same doctors, and it is quite an insidious way to treat people. And as my attitude towards benefits and the government is that they really don't care one little bit about people who are disabled, people who are not, shall we say, normal, or who've not got money. They just don't care. And it's a terribly sickening and sad thing to be in. Vicky, I think you've got a question again.
Yeah, I wanted to come in on one point, but then Darcy made me think of another point as well. So the main point was universal credit and this temporary uplift that the government gave during the coronavirus pandemic. And it's as if like deserving people who've fallen through the cracks. So we need to uplift the universal credit by £20 a month, temporary. So that is acknowledging that the universal credit isn't enough to live on for them to do that in the first place. And it's going to be removed in September.
Yeah. And
Unite Community have a big campaign to fight for that. And those people that were on legacy benefits, because universal credit is being rolled out, so if you hadn't been rolled out onto universal credit, you didn't get this £20 either.
Yeah, there's a case at the High Court about that. So the DWP might be forced to give legacy benefits a back payment if the people who are bringing that win their case.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah.
But I think permeating throughout it is there are undeserving people and deserving people, and that people prior to this pandemic, if they're unfortunate enough to have universal credit, they're undeserving. We're going to give them a sum of money that is not enough for them to live on, and the whole system is predicated on that. So that's something for us to fight for and to fight against. And then the other point that Dorothy raised was this question of early identification of needs in schools. I've got a lot of experience of dealing with this when I was a teacher and a Senko. And all I can say is the whole system is based upon not acknowledging those needs, because as soon as you acknowledge those needs, they have to be met and paid for.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry to say that, but children are being done out, and their parents and families are doing without the support that they need. And sometimes families are in denial of what of their child's needs. And even though we try to fight for them, you find yourself having to deal with parents who are on their own journey of coming to terms with special needs of their children and the whole system. And somebody that was, for example, identified by me as having these autistic traits in nursery, left our school without after year 6 without a proper diagnosis, and they pay lip service all the time to early identification, and it absolutely drives me mad. I don't know who's going to expose, the way we let our young children down in school. I don't know, but then that feeds on, as David was saying, to his experience of school then, and getting the qualifications and support that you need to achieve to the best of your ability. So those are just 2 things I wanted to say. They're not really questions, are they?
Oh, but they're fine. They're fine.
My good friends.
Yeah, they're fine.
Yeah.
They're fine.
Well, I've got 12 slides to do on universal credit, so it's a bit quicker than the other one. So I'll
you're carrying on, are you?
Sorry. But the £20 uplift, what this is about is the government panicked, because what universal credit is about is they call people who are able to work and who are on benefits the stock, and the stock really doesn't change that much. That's actually what the DWP call it internally, is they call people on universal credit, job seekers allowance, the stock and the turnover of the stock. And now, just very briefly, because I don't want to go into this topic too much, because what the benefit system is about is to keep the working class in fear of not having a job, of not accepting a 0 hours contract, of not being a slave to the capitalist system. And universal credit is all about that. The sanction system is all about that. It's to grind down and punish the stock. And when the pandemic happened, the Conservative Party panicked, because all of a sudden there was going to be these thousands and thousands of people who in the past were unlikely to ever encounter the benefit system. And all of a sudden their voters would see how bad the benefit system was or is for the first time. So that's why they put the £20 uplift in. It was a political decision, like any decision is. So that brings me nicely to my presentation, excuse me, on universal credit. So because time's getting on, I'll do the quick run through the 12 slides, and then I'll take some questions again after, if that's okay. So hopefully you will see my screen now, and I will...
David, could I suggest something before you start? Yeah. The thing is that what you've talked about, the benefit system and what have you, has been incredibly interesting and very, very good. What I'd like to do in some ways is to say, save this for another time.
Yeah.
Come back in 2 or 3 weeks' time, and we'll go through your presentation, because I don't want to hear your presentation rushed. And I'm sure there are people here who don't want to have it rushed. We've been given so much information tonight, and so much good information. I think, let us think on that. And I will certainly invite you back in 2 or 3 weeks' time in July to give the other presentation, if that's all right with yourself. Yeah, sure.
If anybody, in that case, if anybody's got any more questions or comments, then, or unless you want to get off because it's 9:15, I'm quite happy to stay around.
Well, we usually do an hour and a quarter, as you know, right? All right. The thing is, people's, you've got some people here who past their bedtime, and also they can't concentrate that long. I've got Dave Kopak sat there and he's falling asleep. No, he's not. It's just that I can't see his face. But no, seriously, Dave, I would like to give your second presentation as much concentration and as much thought as we've given this one. because I think this one has been absolutely fantastic. It actually goes into the nuts and bolts of the system, which we all know about, but we don't know enough about. And I've got thumbs up, and I've got some claps for you. So I'm going to give you a proper clap, and I'm going to say it's good to know you, and thank you very, very, very much for that, Dave. It was absolutely super. Cheers, mate. And we'll see you in a couple of time.
It was very basic. It is an incredibly complicated system that the Conservatives have put in place. Well, it actually started under the last Labour government, the changes, but it's mainly the Conservatives that have really, made use of it.
I know, mate. I know.
Very complicated.
Thank you.